We have got to reach a ceasefire, both as it relates to what's happening in Lebanon and, of course, Gaza. We are working around the clock in that regard. But we need these wars to end, and we've got to definitely de-escalate what is happening in the region, and we're working on that.
Vice President Kamala Harris joined President Joe Biden on his phone call with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week. It was the first call between the leaders in 50 days and a chance for the U.S. to discuss Israel's response to Iran's ballistic missile attack on Thursday. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also spoke with his Israeli counterpart. Major General Patrick Ryder is the Pentagon's press secretary. I spoke to him about those phone calls and Israel's expected retaliation on Iran. Major General Patrick Ryder, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
President Biden held his first call in about 7 weeks with the Israeli Prime Minister. Apparently, they discussed Israel's sort of ongoing deliberations in terms of its response to Iran. Would you say at this stage that Israel heard the U.S. concerns and that the two countries are on the same page?
Well, as you know, we have frequent communication with our Israeli partners. In fact, our Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, spoke to his Israeli counterpart last night. We continue to consult with the Israelis in terms of their next steps as it relates to Iran's missile attack on October 1st. As I'm sure you can appreciate, I won't speak for Israel and talk about what they may or may not do, but we do continue to have frequent communication on this topic and the broader security situation in the Middle East in general.
But would you say that the United States has communicated sort of what your concerns are in terms of retaliation, what the president would prefer Israel do or not do?
Well, I won't speak for President Biden, but certainly we believe that we have very good communications with the Israelis, and certainly throughout the course of this campaign have expressed both our support for the defense of Israel as well as our concerns about the potential for broader escalation. What we don't want to see in the Middle East is this conflict turn into a wider regional war. And so we've been working very actively toward that end and have also been communicating that to our Israeli partners as well.
You say you have good communications and also that Secretary Austin spoke to his counterpart last night. But Secretary Austin says that he was given no advance warning of the Israeli strikes that killed Hassan Nasrallah, that he was not aware that was going to happen. Why did the Department of Defense not get a heads up from the Israelis on that?
Well, that's really a question for the Israelis. As you highlight, Secretary Austin does speak very frequently with his counterpart in Israel. They do have a good line of communication. As for why the Israelis gave us such short notice, again, that's something for them to address, other than to say, we're going to keep having these conversations. We're going to keep working towards the defense of Israel. But it's, of course, always helpful for us if we have a sense of the situation to protect our own forces as well as do what we need to do to ensure that Israel is protected from the many threats that it's facing.
So, and I'll talk about sort of your concerns around that, but just one more time, if you'll bear with me, do you have the impression then that the United States will be given a heads up when Israel chooses to retaliate against Iran? Because their defense minister made it clear that was still going to happen, and that it would be, what he said, surprising. So will the United States be in the loop this time?
Yeah, Rosemary, what I can tell you is we will keep the lines of communication open. I'm not going to speculate or get into hypotheticals about what may or may not happen, other than to say, again, we've been very clear with our Israeli partners that we are going to support their defense and that we want to continue to work with them to ultimately de-escalate the tensions in the region, work towards diplomatic resolution, and I'll just leave it there.
How maybe you can just give me your assessment of how precarious or dangerous a moment we're in the region. As you say, the goal for everyone, I think, is, or at least the United States and your allies, that the situation not escalate, that this not turn into a regional war. How difficult a moment is this, Major General?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an incredibly complex and very difficult moment. I mean, I think everyone's very well aware of the tensions right now that exist in the Middle East, which is why we have worked so hard for the last year with our allies and our partners to, again, not only support the defense of Israel, but just as importantly, work towards preventing this from becoming a wider regional war. No one wins in a scenario where there's a wider war in the Middle East. And so we're going to keep working very, very diligently to preventing that from happening.
Well, maybe you could also talk about the fact that the Pentagon's sending several thousand more troops to the region, I think getting you up to over 40,000 now. How important is that in terms of deterrence, protecting interests, making sure that there is some ongoing stability and without the U.S. getting dragged into it, of course?
Yeah, and to put that into context, after Hamas conducted its terrorist attack against Israel a year ago on October 7, we, as you highlight, deployed additional forces into the region to do several things. One was to protect U.S. forces and Americans who are in the Middle East. And number two is to support the defense of Israel, but also importantly, to be ready for a wide variety of contingencies. And to send a deterrence message that we don't want to see any state or non-state actors exploiting the situation to again, find ourselves in a wider regional conflict. So having those capabilities there, we think sends a very clear message that we're going to support the defense of Israel, that we're going to protect our forces, and that we'll be ready to respond as appropriate. But I also want to emphasize that right now, the main effort is on diplomacy, and it's on working with regional partners to include Israel to find a way to get back to a ceasefire, to resolve the tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border through diplomacy. And that's going to continue to be our main effort, backed up by the Department of Defense.
Well, I want to ask you a couple of questions about Ukraine, if I can, because there was supposed to be a meeting this weekend, but it has been delayed because of the other situation that you guys are dealing with, obviously, the fallout from Hurricane Milton. When do you expect that Defense Contact Group meeting to happen? And is it problematic, I guess, that world leaders are not getting together at this point in order to sort of see where things are at for Ukraine?
Well, as you highlight, the meeting that was originally scheduled to take place tomorrow in Germany has been postponed. I don't have a new date or location yet for when the next Ukraine Defense Contact Group will be held. But what I will say is that work continues very actively to support Ukraine amongst all of the allies and partners. And so while the UDCG is an incredibly important meeting, and another one will happen in the near future, you also have to remember that all these nations, to include the United States, continue to work together, as well as Canada, to ensure that Ukraine has the security assistance that it needs. So that work is ongoing and not impacted by the postponement.
Just one last question on Ukraine before I let you go. The new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, said that he supports Ukraine's ability to strike deep into Russia. Does the United States have any sense of whether your position will change on that? Because there is obviously concerns heading into another difficult winter of war.
Yeah, well, certainly, first of all, our policy hasn't changed as it relates to U.S.-provided long-range strike capabilities. But, it's also important to keep in mind that there is no single capability, no silver bullet that is going to enable Ukraine to be successful in its efforts to preserve its sovereignty and its freedom. The United States and over 50 allies and partners have provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in security assistance, and we're going to continue to support them for as long as we need to, for as long as it takes. And again, I would also highlight that Ukraine has a pretty remarkable indigenous capability when it comes to long-range strike and its drones, for example. We've seen them recently strike targets well inside Russia that are having an impact. But all that to say, we're going to continue to have conversations with our Ukrainian partners to ensure they have what they need to be able to protect their sovereignty and protect their people.
Major General Patrick Ryder, thank you so much for making the time. I know you're very busy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosemary. I appreciate it.